You're listening to Power Athlete Radio, a podcast dedicated to empowering your performance every damn day. Join former NFL pro and Power Athlete founder John Welborn as he dissects the greatest minds in strength, conditioning, and more. So whether your goal is to be the hammer, destroy mediocrity, or simply move the dirt, you've come to the right place. Now with the warm-up done, let the gains begin.
Hey, Power Athlete Nation. I have a special 3-part series that I'm working through with my good friend, Dr. Kirk Parsley, asking him some questions that have not only been coming out at us on the Discord. For those of you not following Power Athlete programs, one of the perks of following one of the Power Athlete programs is the Discord. We have an extremely robust Discord packed full of Power Athlete coaches and athletes, and it is a nonstop exchange of ideas and humor and whatnot, everything you come to expect for Power Athlete. But in there's questions that keep popping up, and one of the questions that pops up and also popped up from my wife recently with some of the clients and the people she's working with have to do with these GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1, semaglutide, trizipizide, and some of the drugs that people are going for weight loss. So as I've gone through it, there's kind of two camps. This is panacea, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened, and then there's the other side where this is the worst thing to happen to humanity. So I invited my good friend Dr. Parsley to come through and talk about how these drugs work, a little bit on the origin, and if they're healthy, and if this is a viable option for people. So this is part 1, and we'll dive into this with Dr. Parsley, who knows more about this because not only is he a medical doctor and a treating clinician and putting patients on it, and has a really deep knowledge of all the GLP-1s, and we get into this real deep. So buckle up if you're curious about this, and it's in the media, so you should be. So Dr. Kirk Parsley. We get a ton of questions. Obviously, we have a Discord through Power Athlete, and one of the questions that keeps coming up, actually not even on the Discord, but more from my wife, which I think is hysterical because she has a bunch of different clients and works with different women that ride horses. Yeah. And they're asking her all the time about this GLP-1, so Ozempic and trizipizide. Am I saying that one? Tirzepatide. And when you get online, and look out into the interwebs, you have two people kind of in one camp where it's like, this is completely safe. This is probably going to save humanity. And then you have the other side where this is the devil. This is going to destroy humanity. Right. And there doesn't really feel like anybody that's in the middle. It's so polarizing. So one of the questions I wanted to ask is your opinion on the GLP-1s, and more importantly, are they safe? What are the side effects? Yeah. And because I know that not only are you a medical doctor, but you do kind of standard or concierge healthcare with high net worth individuals, and I'm sure this is something you've encountered
all the time.
Yeah.
Well, I like I sent in your text. Like nobody loves a champion for too long, right? Like something comes along and it's too good for too long, and there's going to be a polarization of people who want to beat it down. I think it's important to realize when you talk about, when you talk about peptides, these are things that are in your system, they're in your body already, right? And so you're capitalizing on a known pathway. Now these are peptide analogs, so they're not identical, and so there could be some downstream effects in that. But the first I ever heard about this was when I was doing a bariatric surgery rotation in medical school. I think it's like 2003. And they noticed, like, when they do gastric bypass, Roux-en-Y, whatever, they cure diabetes in like a week. And this person still weighs 500 pounds. They still need to lose 300 pounds.
Wait, say that again?
They cure diabetes in a week.
So when they do the gastro bypass, they cure diabetes in a week.
And they had no idea how. Like, they were like, okay, well, that's it. The whole idea was like, well, we're going to shrink their stomach down to nothing, and then, they're going to quit eating less, they're going to eat a lot less, and then their fat cells are going to shrink down, their insulin sensitivity is going to increase, and all of a sudden it's like diabetes is gone. They're like, well, how in the hell is that possible, right? Like we didn't do anything for that. And one of the big hallmarks, for diabetes is that the number of fat cells doesn't proliferate, but the fat cells themselves get really big. Like the bigger a fat cells, the less responsive it is, right?
So are we born with a certain amount of fat cells?
I don't think so. Like that's been postulated, but like when we get into the GLP-1s, like there's some research to suggest that GLP-1s can actually increase your number of fat cells.
That was one of the things I saw online. They talked about hyperplasia of fat cells with GLP-1, but
Yeah.
Isn't there a point, like, I mean, to say that as a baby you're born with a certain amount of fat cells, and over time they shrink and go back?
They used to say that about neurons too, and now it's like, no, you can make new neurons.
So
like,
we can make new fat cells.
I think so. Like it seems.
Is it hyperplasia, or is that hyperplasia? Is the splitting?
So it'd be hyperproliferation.
Hyperproliferation.
Yeah, and the plasia could be just the growth of them. So anyway, over time they figured out, well, all of these incretin peptides are high, right? So GLP1, GIP, PPY, and CCK, cholecystokinin, right? And they're like, I wonder why those are high, right? And what the hell are they? Like nobody seriously knew. Like, I mean, what's interesting to think about is like when I went through medical school, the endocrine system was taught like, well, it's the thyroid, it's the adrenals, it's the pancreas,
and they're all independent, and they all live in a little vacuum.
It's like okay, well maybe the intestines are, okay, that's an endocrine organ because it's secreting all of these incretins and like or incretins, however you want to say it, and that's affecting glucose metabolism and all this other shit. It's like, okay, well, I guess the gut's an endocrine organ, and then of course the gut. It's connected to the nervous system. Oh, so it's there's a kind of a gut brain. So the gut's kind of the neurological system as well. And then, of course, fat cells, turn out to have, leptin and be sensitive to leptin. And so that, that's an endocrine organ as well. And it turns out like almost every freaking tissue in your body is an endocrine organ, right? And so they weren't thinking of it in that sense. And then, so they started looking into what these things do. And then they, like in Petri dishes, they're like, hey, when you do this GLP-1 in pancreatic cells, like it shuts down insulin production. I'm sorry, it boosts insulin suppression and it shuts down glucagon. Like bam, so it's like that. So like, okay, well maybe that'll work. So they do it in animal studies, same thing. Humans, maybe not. It seems like it does. I mean, when you look at the overall, when you look at the overall pattern of blood glucose versus what they eat, body weight, all that stuff. When you do like a 3-6 month trial, whatever, fasting blood glucose goes down, A1C goes down, but sometimes they're doing that with GIP as well, and then of course it's affecting their diet significantly, right? So like my take on the GLP-1s, like the biggest complaint you'll hear from them is that you lose too much lean mass, right?
But why is that? Is that because people aren't lifting weights and people aren't eating a high protein diet? We interrupt this episode with a shameless self-promotion. Power Athlete delivers battle-tested performance programming for every kind of athlete. So do you want to go from average Joe to MVP? Then dominate with Field Strong. Get stacked and jacked with Jack Street. Hustle in life and still build muscle with Grindstone. Fear no opponent with Dragon Slayer. Be harder than coffin nails with Hammer. Max out minimal equipment with Lean Enable. Or unlock those newbie gains with Bedrock. Get over to powerathletehq.com/training and choose your 7-day free trial right here, right now. Get lifting, get training, get in shape, all while listening to the rest of this show.
Yes, and because people are losing weight too fast, which is fine, right? I mean, if you're 65 and you lose 100 pounds and you lose 40 pounds of lean tissue. Now, there's also a case to be made when you read the way that the studies were done, like a lot of that lean tissue could be water as well. So we don't really know how much, but think about this. What's the number one cause of all diseases is stress.
I thought it was obesity.
Well, obesity is a byproduct of stress, right? Yeah. And so it's like, so the number, like stress is it, right? So you have, most people who are like obese, like morbidly obese, have eating disorders, right? It's their addiction. It's how they calm themselves. Well, that's the limbic system, right? You have a reward system and an anxiety system, and they're kind of like coupled together. And these GLP-1s affect that system as well. So they'll regulate your dopamine levels, and they'll regulate your amygdala tone, your sympathetic tone. They actually, GLP-1 actually has, the incretins. They actually have what's called neuropods. They can actually bind to a neuron. So in the gut, there's parasympathetic nerve endings, and they can just bind to that, and they can send a signal to the brain, and you cause parasympathetic tone. So it definitely decreases stress hormones, right? And then it's flattening out, it's regulating dopamine levels, and it's regulating, the amygdala, which is the alarm system, which is secreting epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are stress hormones, right? Adrenaline and epinephrine's adrenaline, norepinephrine's adrenaline for the brain. And then cortisol, of course, which is spiking blood glucose. And all of that impairs the prefrontal cortex, which is where your willpower is and your decision-making skills and all that other shit. So when people have eating disorders, which is almost everybody who's obese, no matter what they say, because, people are bad historians about what they eat, but everybody is eating too much. Like, you can't get obese by not eating too much. Like that's just the way it is. And they're using it for comfort.
You mean hormones?
Right. and then there's a feedback loop, right? Then they become leptin insensitive. They become insulin insensitive. Their reward pathways in their brain shift, and they need that dopamine rush over and over, and they're eating for the dopamine rush, and they're eating to calm their nervous system down. Like those two kids I had you come in and evaluate. Like, those kids are addictive personalities. Like, they go from one addiction to another addiction to another addiction.
They have 16 dogs.
Right.
They have 12 houses,
right.
20 cars. Like, right. I was like, and then the interesting thing is they're telling me this. I had anxiety,
right,
listening to them trying to manage all of this shit and being like, this is the exact opposite how I run my life. I couldn't live like this.
Yeah, and they were both alcoholics.
Yeah.
And then they shifted over to marijuana. They're smoking marijuana every day. He's like, I don't know why my anxiety is so bad. I smoke marijuana every day. I'm like, that's why your anxiety is so bad.
It's giving me anxiety. One of the side effects that they found, a pretty cool study with the GLP-1s, is that people that were alcoholics no longer craved alcohol.
Yeah, because that's a dopaminergic pathway, right? So you're affecting the limbic system. So it's any kind of craving, any type of addiction,
like alcoholism, food, all those porn,
every kind of addiction that you're using for dopaminergic rush. I would imagine even social media, like people who scroll social media, I bet you they'll do a study soon that shows you're scrolling that less. But here's the deal. It is a pharmacological trick. It's not GLP-1. It's a GLP-1 agonist. It looks like, acts like, behaves like.
So if it quacks like a duck, walks like a duck.
And Ambien is a GABA agonist, right?
Yeah.
And Ambien, we know, has some side effects, right? So there should be an exit strategy for them. However, the amount, of course, this started because bariatric surgery wasn't for obesity, it was for diabetes, right? And then it has the byproduct of helping people lose weight, which is part of curing diabetes. And so these drugs started out as diabetic drugs, right? And if we can control diabetes, we control all sorts of things: atherosclerosis and heart attacks and pulmonary fibrosis and all kinds of shit that goes bad when you have chronically elevated blood glucose, poor circulation, all this shit that goes along with it, become obese. So the GLP-1 analogs seem to work almost identically, but it's hard to tell because honestly, we don't know 100% of what any of these things do, right? Like we can measure stuff in the bloodstream, we can measure stuff in the saliva, we can't measure what's going on in your brain. There's so many things, there's so many complex systems. Like I was goofing off about the endocrine system, but it's true with every system. I tell all my clients that the body has no systems. Everything is affecting everything simultaneously. It's like the climate, right? It's like cow farts are the problem in the climate. Like, how many other factors are there to the climate? It's like billions, and you can't isolate cow farts, right? So it's the same thing. So there's way more that we don't know than we do know. But what we do know is that GLP-1 definitely increases glucagon, right? Or I keep backing that. It decreases glucagon. So glucagon's causing you to dump blood glucose. So you're lowering your blood glucose with that, right? That's secreted. The GLP-1 is secreted up in your small intestine, right around the duodenum. The other endocrines are affecting bile secretion, gallbladder contraction, all this other stuff. So it's really affecting the digestion of your food. So it decreases your blood glucose, it decreases gastric emptying, and it affects the satiety system of your brain, which is the limbic system, right? And there's some other neuroregulation of appetite, but it's helping with all of that stuff. And so if I put somebody on that, and here's the interesting thing, when you take in oral glucose, that spikes insulin 3 times more than if you put glucose in your veins, right?
Well, it spikes blood sugar.
Did I say insulin? Yeah. So okay. It spikes blood sugar 3 times higher, right? Yeah. So it's 300% more blood glucose.
Well, it's because there's receptors in the back of the tongue, and my knowledge on type 1, because of my son, it's like trying to hit a moving target daily.
Right.
Like if he has like low blood sugar, what we do is we give him these glucose tabs and he has to hold them in his mouth.
Right.
If he holds them in his mouth, it'll come back if he swallows them. This episode of Power Athlete Radio is powered by Train Heroic, the most immersive strength training app experience on the market. We've built an online training business by partnering with Train Heroic to deliver all of our world-class training programs like Jack Street, Hammer, Field Strong, and Grindstone. To learn which Power Athlete training program best suits your goals, head to powerathletehq.com/training. And if you're a coach looking to build a business with the best training tech in the business, head to trainheroic.com/powerathletehq. And now back to the show.
Right.
Doesn't do anything.
Right. Yeah. So oral glucose spikes blood glucose a lot more than putting it in your vein. So what's interesting is like, well, if my food is sitting around in my gut and taking a very long time to digest, and these other integrins that are normally secreted in my body are going to work, and I'm secreting bile and I'm emulsifying fat and I'm secreting. So GLP1 actually enhances the effect of proteases as well. So I start breaking down proteins into amino acids, and now I can digest that stuff. I can digest fat and protein a lot better than I can digest carbohydrates, because the carbohydrates are staying around in my stomach a lot longer. They're not getting broken down. And so the appetite will eventually regulate itself to prioritize protein and fat. And if you notice, like all natural protein comes with the source of fat, right? And so people's dietary cravings actually shift towards protein and fat while they're on that drug. And then it takes about one fifth of semaglutide of the GLP-1 analogs to maintain the weight loss once you've lost the weight completely.
So like, talk to me about the dosage, right? Like, let's say, because I've heard it both ways. Like, for example, my wife, one of the ladies that she knows and rides with, she was like, I'm going through menopause. I can't lose this last 10 pounds. And they put her on like a micro dose. I think it was like 0.25, like milligrams a week. And
micrograms,
micrograms. I mean, whatever it should
be. You're right. 0.25 milligrams.
Yeah, 0.25 milligrams. They gave it to her. My wife's like, she lost that 10 pounds. And she's like, I've never felt better. I feel more positive. I don't crave sugar. And she's like, this has been a miracle for me. And so Kate came back and asked me, and she's like, is it really? And I'm like, the only thing I know is there's no such thing as a free lunch. Right. So we kind of got into this discussion, which obviously led us here. So there's, when you look online for dosages, I mean, there's like people that are medically obese,
right?
Like you got to cut them out of your house, Gilbert Grape style,
right?
There's a dosage for those individuals, and then obviously they trade it down, but it's not really based upon body weight. I mean, it's not like, hey, if you're excess of 50% body fat,
it's really all reactionary. So the main appetite suppressing effect of it is nausea. So they call it. They say that you decrease your appetite, but you're really nauseous. It's just like, as soon as you take a bite of something, you're like, ooh, like I don't like that, right? Like you start feeling like you're going to throw up.
So that's the major.
Yeah. So like that's the major mechanism. So it's like, if you're getting nauseous every time you eat food, you're not going to crave food.
Yeah.
And it's a negative feedback loop, right? And so the benefit, like those two kids we're talking about, like I had both those guys on tirzepatide because I think it's better to have the GLP-1 in there as well. The GIP in there.
Can we get into the difference between tirzepatide and Ozempic?
So we'll do that. So I have them on that, and like I have a lot of clients on it, but I also just know a lot of people who are on it. A lot of Brandy's friends from Paris, Texas, which is like small town. A lot of overweight bubbas out there. A lot of those guys have started doing it. It doesn't take any discipline. It's hard to overcome the effects of this drug. But what happens is, like, I was just talking to a guy last weekend. We went up to the lake, and he's lost 60 pounds or something. He probably needs to lose another 50, but he's a big guy. And he's like, I was off of it for 6 weeks because whatever, traveling, this and that. And he said, And then when I finally got back on it, it's like I hadn't gained a single pound. And this dude has no discipline. I mean, zero discipline. So it's changing people's behavior. So my point of it was like, benzos are GABA analogs, GABA agonists. Ambien is a GABA agonist. Would I ever give those drugs? Yeah, sometimes. Like sometimes there's an appropriate use for those, but you have to have an exit strategy. And I think the same is true for GLP-1. So, my annual programs, I'm taking people who have basically destroyed themselves and I'm trying to make them healthy again in a year. It's a big undertaking, but 80% of that is lifestyle changes, right? And this is a huge lifestyle tool. I mean, it's huge because everything that they would ordinarily have to do with willpower and overcome, and what's the first thing that happens when when you start trying to overcome a common behavior is what? You stress out, right? Because you're like, oh, I really want that. I got to tear myself away from that. I'm going to fail if I do that. And people just start running these loops and they start stressing themselves out. Stress is the worst thing you can possibly do. Like the primary goal of my program is to decrease your stress because you have to sleep well, right? And you have to have low stress hormones to sleep. And, stress controls your blood glucose and stress controls your prefrontal cortex functioning and all this other stuff. So if you have a drug that's like, hey, I can completely change this guy's eating habits. And then when he gets off this drug, he has a really, really good shot of like never having those eating habits again, as long as he, just sticks to what he learned in this year, as long as he's motivated. Now there's like 1/100th of the willpower they need to keep going. I don't think anything's a smart idea to say, well, I'm going to take this for the rest of my life. Sure. Except maybe hormones, because maybe at some point you don't care about performance anymore, but so I think they're not a panacea. There are some downsides to them. There's some research suggesting that they might increase thyroid tumors. I don't know if they're cancerous thyroid tumors, so we'll have to wait and see on that. But the main side effects, like people say, you lose too much lean mass. It's like, okay, well if you're a man, like, and I work with all male clients, right? So if you're a 300-pound man, you have 185 pounds of lean body mass, and we got to drop 120 pounds off a year or something.
Well, I mean, fat is always so oxidative. I mean, if you look at, like excess fat, I mean, you're talking about stress hormones. I mean, all of these factors are exasperated.
It's so metabolically dysregulated. It's poison for your body. Yeah. Like it literally it is a huge endocrine organ. Like everybody thinks of it as like it's a major endocrine organ.
Well, and the major endocrine organ too that people don't talk about is your skin. Yeah. Because if you think about like the skin continuing all the way through, like continuous into the mouth down, I mean, it's all connected.
Right.
So, I mean, if you're having excess obesity, I mean, all the other things that you're taking in, I mean, that barrier, it's, there has never been anybody like there was a bit of, I don't know, like who the fuck came up with this, but the idea of like fat and fit, fat and healthy.
Right.
Which are two oxymorons, like the biggest little city in the world.
Yeah.
Like this body positivity.
Short and tall.
Yeah, you can be obese and healthy.
Yeah.
To a certain point. Yeah. Like if you're in your early 20s,
depending on what you're calling healthy.
Yeah. Well, but like my blood work's normal. Yeah, that's fine. Maybe today, next week, maybe next month, next year, it won't be.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a ticking time bomb.
I've never seen an obese person with normal insulin, and if I could only have one lab, like. Your insulin sensitivity tells me how healthy you are. If I'm just going to choose one lab, that's a lab.
Well, fat being oxidative, lean body mass and muscle being extremely insulin sensitive.
Right.
So if you're obese and you don't carry a ton of lean body mass, then it's almost next to impossible to have that level of insulin sensitivity.
Right. And the other good thing about the GLP-1s, I don't really know why this is, but what the research has shown on this is like usually when you calorically restrict. Obviously, everybody calorically restricts themselves on this, and this is one of the major mechanisms.
Could they just calorically restrict? And I'll give you a hypothetical. You have somebody on the GLP-1, they're taking these drugs, and then you have the same, let's say, person who you just calorically restrict.
Right.
Are the physiological changes the same? Is it just like a magic way of finding caloric restriction?
It's not that simple, because both GLP-1 but especially GIP. GIP is glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide, right? So you have to have you have to have an elevated blood glucose for GIP to suppress glucagon, right? Whereas like insulin, if I just keep, if I just keep affecting blood glucose through insulin, I can go aberrant hugely either way because, like that's what a diabetic can do, right? He can overdose on insulin, he can kill himself, right?
Sure.
Or you can underdose on insulin and have essentially no effect, and you can go into activity. Yeah. And so the GIP-1 or the GIP, has the benefit of being dependent upon your blood glucose. It's like an extra step. So that's actually in the colon, right? That's secreted in the colon. And then of course these analogs last a lot longer, right? So GLP-1 and GIP last like 2 to 5 minutes after you eat, right? So it's like those things aren't around. These analogs last, for a week. Obviously, you can take an injection every week. So there's probably something off there, right? Because anytime a hormone is cyclic with eating or sleeping or something, and you're like, well, hell with that, I'm just going to make it flat.
Sure.
Probably not ideal, right?
Yeah.
That's why taking 300 milligrams of testosterone at the beginning of the week and not taking anything else for 10 days is a bad idea. And the ideal thing would be to take a little bit every night before you go to sleep, and have your normal cycles, right?
Is it better to take testosterone in the morning or before bed?
Before bed.
Before bed.
Yeah.
How do I not know that?
I don't know. Well, I mean,
dude,
there's like I wouldn't say.
I mean, last time we talked, you talked about subcutaneous versus intramuscular injections, and you're like, yeah, sub-Q, and I was like, I always read it was intramuscular.
Yeah,
but
well, it was. I mean, for years, I had so many patients who wouldn't stay on it because the injections hurt too bad. Like they're having to jab it into their thighs because it's really hard to do your own glute,
Yeah.
Especially older guys, and so they're jabbing into the thighs, and they just quit because it hurts.
Well, that's why you got to do all this transverse plane med ball work, so you make sure that if you're too fat to be able to rotate to be able to hit your glute, then we got a lot of problems. That's another indicator of this stuff.
Well, you could just be old and broken.
All right, so to go on, but if you had two, like I said, if you had two identical people,
right.
and like one you locked in a room and you basically just like shoveled them in food and they had no ability to cheat outside of what you're providing them, and then you gave somebody the GLP-1.
So then you're going to have lower incretins, right? Then you're never going to have a high blood glucose level for something like GIP to have its effect, even if it were there. So these things are being secreted in response to food. So if you're calorically restricting and just simply not eating, well, then you aren't secreting these, and these are metabolically regulating, right? So the things we're talking about is probably 1/100th or 1/1000th of what all they do, right? There's so many biological, but what you wouldn't get from the caloric restriction was the changes in the limbic system. So you wouldn't get that appetite, that neuroregulation of appetite suppression. You wouldn't get that dopamine level control, which is where all the willpower is coming from. And willpower, wears out, man. It's finite. You wake up with a maximum, you go to bed with a minimum, no matter what you do. And so your ability to stick with your diet is going to be worse and worse. And the higher your stress gets, the less willpower you have. So you aren't going to get the same effects, and then you aren't going to get the same fuel partitioning because these incretins help with the metabolism of fat and protein versus glucose, right? So you're preferentially fuel partition, like you're preferentially using your fat and your amino acids and your proteins as your macros,
sure.
Right? And then of course they actually change palate sensation, and they make people crave less sweet things. And if you're calorically restricting somebody, somebody can calorically restrict themselves on ice cream, right? And then how good is that, right? So I have never seen the same effect, and I've been doing this for 15 years. I've only been using these GLP-1 and GIP agonists for 5 years, maybe. I started with the liraglutide. Liraglutide is the one that's been shown in research to increase the number of fat cells.
Oh yeah, the fat hyperplasia.
Yeah, they're probably all going to do that, but I don't think the research has been done on those yet. So that had a huge benefit, and like I said, they have if somebody is calorically restricted, they're just not eating. They aren't getting a secretion of these. These are actually, like you said, binding the vagus nerve, and they're causing parasympathetic activity, and they're slowing down sympathetic. They're slowing down sympathetic and increasing parasympathetic. So you're balancing your autonomics like meditation does, or like breath work does, or like
so would you say there's a case? Would you say there's a case for these GLP-1s in healthy individuals?
Absolutely.
So like if you're
for behavioral change.
For behavioral change.
Behavioral change, or some people are fairly fit and just don't have great insulin sensitivity. And like if there's one thing I could optimize on you, it'd be like if you could have a fasting blood glucose of 70 or 75,
like 68, 70,
with a fasting insulin of 2, you're healthy, brother. Like you can go do anything, right? And then another thing is when you calorically restrict, metabolic rate slows down and activity slows down. It doesn't happen with the GLP-1s.
Why is that?
Nobody knows. But it's true with animal studies. It's true with humans.
No, I mean that's one of the things. Whenever we do any caloric restriction stuff, you just end up. You start to feel cold, and all of a sudden your sleep suffers, and this, and you get into this issue, and so now you got to do
people feel like crap, and it's hard to get them to move.
It's like every 3 days you got to do some carb refeed,
right?
So if you're low, you got to kind of ramp it up, and you kind of do this titrated kind of deal.
And until they get sensitive to ketones, it's going to interfere with their intellectual, their cognitive functioning when they're calorically restricting. And
you drink more coffee.
You avoid all that.
Just drink more coffee. It's a secret. You just drink more coffee.
Yeah, that'll help.
That's what I do. I just drink more coffee.
Yeah. Well, you're a genetic anomaly, maybe. Like that's just a lot of stress hormones for people. Yeah.
Well, the problem too is I drink coffee and I can go right to sleep.
Yeah.
It doesn't do anything for me.
You got burnt out adrenals.
You're so broken inside. So
So I think if you think of them as a behavioral modification tool, not a weight loss tool, or a diabetic tool, like they're very good for those. The byproduct of that is the weight loss, and then if you as well, like if you can change people's behavior for a year,
you can. Yeah.
They can just keep going. That's why I love to do just 1 year programs. It's like 1 year and we're done, buddy, right? And then you can carry this on by yourself. You need a lot of knowledge, You need a PhD course in the first 6 months, and then after that, you need some tidbits of knowledge. And by the end of the year, you know more about your health than anybody on the planet. Anyways, You don't need a doctor, you don't need a nutritionist. You need a coach if you want to perform well at a certain activity. But as far as like your metabolic health, you can control that yourself. That's an easy thing to do once you learn how to do it, and once you get there. And so even like I work guys for a year and they lose 100 pounds, so they still need to lose another 50. I'm like, you really don't need me the next year. Yeah. They usually still want to. They want that safety net. Yeah. Sometimes I do.
It's always nice to have somebody to call as a lifeline.
Yeah.
When we were out in Newport Beach, we were out there a couple of weeks ago visiting. My nephew graduated from high school, so we went out there kind of a graduation deal. So every time we went to breakfast or lunch or dinner, I think we stayed at some hotel. No, I'm sorry, we stayed at an Airbnb, so we cooked a little bit. But we took the kids out. Everywhere we went for breakfast, as we were sitting there kind of like ordering and eating, we would see people get up and leave, and the amount of food they ate was like this much, like a full plate with like maybe just like a little bit of food.
Yeah.
And it was crazy to the point where like Kate was like, does the food suck here? I'm like, what do you think? She's like, these people just got up and they left all their food.
Right.
And so we like looked around, and like every table that people would like eat a little bit and get up, and we started noticing everywhere we went that people were only eating a fraction of their food and getting up and leaving. And it wasn't just this, because we found a different breakfast spot every day. And my kids are like housing food. Everybody's eating. And she's like, what's going on here? I'm like, I think we're in the land of Ozempic.
Yeah.
This is the GLP-1s.
Yeah.
These people physically cannot eat. So they sit down, they go to breakfast because, social, or let's go eat breakfast. They eat just a little bit, like a, small piece of toast, a little bit of this or whatever. Yeah. And they were leaving their entire food plates. So I asked the waiter, I'm like, is this pretty common? He's like, the amount of food that we throw out, it would actually be better if they just came in and ordered like 1/10 and we charged them the same price so we didn't have to throw it away.
Yeah.
He's like, we're throwing away like 10x the amount of food that we normally do.
Yeah. Yeah. I took Ozempic and I could eat like one piece of sandwich meat and I felt like I was going to throw up. Like I just go in for like sometimes when I'm working, I'll just go up and like roll up a piece of sandwich meat with a piece of cheese and whatever and eat it. Couldn't even finish one. And I'm like,
that sucks.
this is disgusting.
I don't want to live this life.
No, I wouldn't want to live that life either. But like, I try to take everything to see like what my patients are dealing with, like what the side effects are and whatever. And so that I can speak intelligently about things,
Would was that same with like a microdose, like that lady was taking like 0.25, like a very small amount?
I was taking, I kind of did it until I felt it. So I guess I probably started out at 0.125, did 0.2, and I think I got up to about 5.5. So probably twice what that woman did, and that makes me nauseous for a week.
What's the standard dose that most people are taking? 1 milligram.
The peak, I think the top of the scale that they recommend is 2.5 milligrams.
Oh, shit.
But 1.25 is kind of seems like to be about the right.
So the
0.25 is for diabetes.
So 0.25, then go 5, and people kind of titrate it up.
Yeah, so you titrate it up until you get nauseous. And if you get too nauseous, you can just take Reglan, because Reglan will activate peristalsis and get your stomach going, whatever, and you can back off of it. So that was actually something Brandy came up with. I thought it was quite clever. We had a patient who did too much. He's like, dude, I can't eat anything. I've been nauseous for 4 days. We'll just activate that a little bit. So yeah, you take it till you get nauseous. You back up a little bit to where you're only mildly nauseous when you eat a little too much. And that's kind of the way you titrate it. So it's not, you can call that appetite reduction, but it's nausea. It really is. It's just like you start eating, you get nauseous, you're like, I don't want to eat anymore.
So most people that we've worked with and I've seen, always are in this idea of, hey, I want to cut body fat. Yeah. We've seen people and we've dieted them down and worked with people for years. What's amazing to me is when you start stripping away that, you realize how little lean body mass people carry. Right. And when you strip it away, they just look almost worse. Right. So whenever people tell me hey, I need to cut, my answer is you look a lot better if you gain 5 or 10 pounds of muscle than if we lost 5 or 10 of fat. Right. Now, if you want to gain 10 pounds of muscle, then you want to cut some weight, you're going to be dramatically much happier. A lot of people, I think, overemphasize or over imagine how much muscle they carry. And they always ask me, how long does it take to build muscle? I'm like, dude, when I was young and I started lifting weights, I built muscle at a fast rate. If I can maintain or gain muscle
at your age,
at my age, I'm fucking
epic.
Yeah, it's great. I was able to gain, half a pound of muscle over the course of a year. Yeah. And, and lose some body fat. It's this constant trick. But a lot of these guys, and I think the reason that's getting a lot of negative is that, I see people hashtag flesh bag. See, because you see these people and the skin is just saying, because they're losing it too fast. Yeah. And the problem is that they haven't done the work on the other side. It's not like they spent 10 years lifting heavy weights trying to build as much muscle, and now they're using Ozempic or these GLP1s to effectively cut body fat. Yeah. But I don't know if you can cut body fat alone and not just cut weight and
you're definitely going to lose lean body mass. So you'd have to,
because you're not able to consume the protein you do. Yeah, you're
just not going to have enough. That's all there is to it. There's not going to be enough calories to gain, and at certain ages, it's almost impossible to gain, right? It's follistatin, it's gone, right? So it's
not for us.
Yeah, not for us.
Not for us.
So it's your ability to put on mass.
Thanks, Dr. Khan.
Yeah, your ability to put on muscle mass over the course of your life just gets harder and harder and harder. So yeah, if you're dealing with this 60-year-old woman and she wants to lose 100 pounds, I'd make her sure she goes a lot slower, right? But my average guy is 45 to 55. Usually was a fairly decent athlete before he got overweight, and just kind of crushed himself with his business life, professional goals, whatever. And I don't care. I'll dump that. I'll dump it off that guy as fast as he wants to dump it off, right? Within reason. But again, it's the behavioral change. It's the change of attitude towards the food, and we can dumb down nutrition to one note card, right? And that's all you really need to be healthy, right?
Don't tell people. There's millions of people on the internet that are making this thing overly complex.
Yeah. So you can dumb down nutrition. It's hey, if you'll stick to eating what's on this card, I don't give a shit how much you eat. Eat all you want to. Eat all day. Because you won't. You're just not going to. unless you have an eating disorder, unless it's a psychological thing. And then guys will just Rob has that story about the guy eating the almonds. You ever remember? So he was coaching some guy, and this guy, he just couldn't lose weight. In fact, I think he was gaining weight. And he's like, well, how many almonds are you eating? Because he's just going through his diet. He's, twisting his brain. He's like, how many almonds? He's like, he's like, this much? He's like, yeah. Like, how many times a day? 10. So he's eating like a Costco container worth of almonds every day,
Dude, I had a client like this, came in, we did his diet stuff, couldn't lose weight. And so breaking it down, the guy was meticulous.
Yeah.
And then I finally was like, okay, I see you're drinking 6 coffees a day.
Yeah.
Like, what's in that coffee?
Right.
Turned out he was doing the bulletproof coffee with MCT oil and butter and the coffee. But yet, Dave Asprey told him that those calories don't count,
right? No count.
Because there's something with the Himalayans where they did this thing and they got hippy dippy.
Well, you have to wear the glasses though. If you wear the glasses, then it doesn't count.
Yeah, and like the bigger kind of charlatan you are, the less the calories count.
Right.
So we break this thing down, and I kind of like portioned it out. He was consuming an extra like 1,500 calories a day.
Yeah.
But because somebody told him those calories didn't count, he just put coffee.
Right.
And I was like, well, let's do this. Cut that shit out, and all of a sudden, if I can turn the corner.
Right. Yeah.
So
not surprising.
All right. In the Parsley book of positive or negative, you're going with a thumbs up on the GLP-1s.
Far more positive than negative. And another thing that's coming out in research is that it reverses atherosclerosis. There's a lower incidence of myocardial infarctions when people are in the research trials on these things. So when you're when you're metabolically broken, yes. If you want to lose 10 pounds, no. Like if you're a fit dude, like if you or I should not use it, because like we want to get a little leaner for the summer or something. Like I don't think that's a great idea.
Okay. Well, I
don't think it's necessarily a bad idea, but I think it's excessive.
Well, I feel like that's like a lot of if you're obese, the risk factors for obesity are so high that I'm willing to take the gamble with the GLP-1s and say I would much rather have to deal with this, because I know that all of the 85-90% of the causes of mortality that we're dealing with in this country are obesity driven. So we can kind of solve for that.
Without drugs. Like if things just went fantastic for you and you could lose 8 pounds every month, right, for a year, it'd take you a year to lose 100 pounds, right? And if you're 150 pounds overweight, okay, that's a year and a half to lose that weight. 50 pounds into it, you hardly even notice, the scale would be different. You'd be like, yeah, cool. But you're still wearing the same clothes, right? 100 pounds into it, okay, good, but I'm still 50 pounds overweight. I'm still a big fat guy, right? And I think, okay, I could spend a year with this increased stress, increased joints and increased joint loading, increased inflammation, lack of athleticism, impairment of prefrontal cortex, the stress hormones, like mood regulations, all the shit that goes along with obesity. And I could spend a year and a half getting rid of that and getting rid of your weight. You're still going to lose some lean body mass, but maybe you didn't lose as much. Okay, and now we're still going to put lean body mass on you, right? Like that. Now that's your goal for the rest of your life. Or I could say, bam, we're gonna drop all this off as fast as we can possibly get it off, and you're gonna lose some lean body mass, but now decrease your risk of heart attack and stroke and diabetes and all this other stuff. I've increased your insulin sensitivity. You're gonna be able to get fit faster. All of that fat interferes with blood flow as well, like vascular artery. So so your ability to get your fuel to your cells, so your ability to actually get in shape and increase GLUT4 receptor density, increase mitochondrial density through true aerobic work, because like when you're a big fat dude and you're like doing aerobic work to fatigue, that's not enough to increase mitochondrial density, like a little bit for you, but it's like your muscles aren't your muscles aren't what's struggling. It's your cardiopulmonary system that's struggling, right? And so I'd rather just and again, 65-year-old woman who needs to lose 100 pounds, I'd be very careful. I'd string that out over a long time, right? As long as I could take it and keep her motivated. as long as I could. But like, if
Jen Wiederstrom, who we had on the podcast, a good friend of ours, she was one of the trainers on The Biggest Loser. And so she's taken these people on these, adventures where they've lost a ton amount of weight.
Right.
And when I asked her, she still goes and visits these and still has great relationships, but the amount of people that rebound, and she's like, I wish there was something I could give them that filled the void.
Right.
And so what I imagine is that, they go through, and it's pretty, it's not unscrupulous, but it's TV. They're trying to get these dramatic weight losses.
Yeah.
They're monitoring their food. They're starving these people. They're exercising them fucking to the brink.
They're exercising people who shouldn't be exercising.
Oh, yeah. And you see them doing it.
And they're doing crazy stuff with them. It's like,
and you're like, holy shit.
Yeah. It's like carrying a log over your head while you're climbing bleachers or something. It's like, what?
Yeah. And these people are big.
This dude should walk.
And then they're putting them up in like spandex and making them way in front. And then the people are like, crushed. So, it's interesting TV, but now you have something where, it feels like the drug becomes symbiotic, where now all of a sudden it's working with you to help you have, So, I like for all the side effects and all the kind of the bad that I've been reading, I still go back to that can't be as bad as being obese over time.
Right. Being metabolically broken is being metabolically broken. It's the most unhealthy thing you can do by definition, right? So if I can be metabolically healthy and need to put on muscle mass, I'd much rather be there than be like, oh, I'm metabolically broken, but I haven't lost all that muscle, right?
Well,
like that.
But also too, if they lost a ton of fat, we get them to the point where they get down into like a very small maintenance, and then we can actually maybe start, try training it down to almost zero, let's say, and then put them back on a high protein diet. And at least then, it's a lot easier to gain muscle if you're already pretty lean, than it is to try to gain muscle and fat and trade this whole fucking.
And our mutual guy that you train, he lost 60 pounds the first year. Didn't really exercise, but now he's on like 0.25, right? And now he's on a low dose. It's just maintenance. He does it when he remembers, like once every couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, he takes a shot.
And he's put on muscle.
He's put on muscle at 72
years old.
Yeah.
I think 6 pounds of muscle is what we put on him in the last almost year.
Yeah.
Which our goal was 7. And I think if I could get him consistently eating better.
Right.
So he
goes
off the wagon a little too much.
Well, but when I first started working with him, he went off the wagon every day, like every day. And so now it's like, I don't know, every couple of weeks or something he goes off.
Yeah,
so,
he's pretty honest about it.
Yeah.
Like, I always give him like the John Gotti line. You remember when John Gotti got up and was, getting prosecuted, and they were asking him all these questions, and finally the defense attorney or the DA asked Gotti, like, why are you being so honest? Like, you're telling us everything. And he's like, I don't fear you motherfuckers. He's like, the only reason people lie is because they fear. I don't fear you motherfuckers. I'll tell you the truth, exactly what I do.
Yeah.
And our mutual friend, I feel like he didn't give a shit.
Yeah.
He's like, hey, like, work around it. And so it's.
But I had an ice cream sundae last night, man. It was awesome.
But then, when I know when he was on that stuff, he couldn't eat for shit, because remember we went out and he ate like this much.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I saw somebody leave a full steak. I wanted to be like, I don't think we could sit at a business dinner and be like, you can eat that?
That was an expensive steakhouse, dude.
It's one of the best.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite spots.
It's legit, yeah.
Okay. So we're going 2 thumbs up on the GLP-1s for people that are obese. Maybe not the best option for people that are healthy, that are just wanting to.
Well, let's just say this: like, no matter what you do, have a realistic exit strategy on them, right? So every piece of pharma I give, I have an exit strategy for it. It's like, we're going to do this for this amount of time, right? Or until we can get these changes done in you, and then we're going to try to drop that, because I want people on as little pharma as possible. And while we're calling these peptides, they're not. They're peptide analogs, so it's pharma, right? It's a pharmacological trick, just like Ambien, just like benzos. Again, I'm a sleep specialist, and I put people on benzos now and then. Like, some guy, some woman loses her husband in combat, and she's going through all this grieving period and whatever, and she cannot sleep at all. It's like, okay, well, some drugged sleep is better than no sleep whatsoever, and like, we have an exit strategy for it. And so I think as long as there's an exit strategy for it, there's a place for pharma, right? There's a place for aspirin, there's a place for antibiotics. There's a place for pharma if you're smart about it. So as long as you have an exit strategy, and I mean, if you want to use it to lose 10 pounds faster or 15 pounds faster or something like that, I mean, I don't think there's any, it just seems like a rough way to go.
I don't want to be nauseous.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't like to
That's
be,
what I said when I was on it. I was like, I'd rather just exert the discipline.
or just, yeah.
But I'm in a different metabolic physical state than, somebody who's 150 pounds overweight.
Yeah.
It's like their options for willpower are like zero, right? That's just not going to work. Never has, never will. I mean, one or two out of 100 people who lose over 100 pounds actually keep that off. Yeah. So
cool. All right. Well, you heard it here first.
Yeah.
Cool. Hey there, Power Athlete Nation. Big shout out to all the heavy hitters who stuck around till the final whistle. If you've been soaking in the knowledge bombs and epic tales we've been dropping for free, here's your chance to be a game changer. Swing by kofi.com/powerathlete and toss a few bucks our way to keep the podcast fueled and firing on all cylinders. That's ko-fi.com/powerathlete. Your support makes a difference. See ya.